and welcome back to the Hamlet Weekly. My name is Cecilia Riley, and I'm here with my co host Alex Brazil to talk to you about an interesting part of William Shakespeare's Hamlet, more specifically, the beginning of Act 4, Scene 4.
That's right, Cecilia. And did you know the beginning of Act 4, Scene 4 is where many critics actually believe that Act 4 should have started?
No, I didn't know that, Alex.
Well, before we get into an analysis of what goes on in these first 25 lines, it's important to understand the context leading up to this point.
I agree. So, the first major point of background in the first scenes of Act 4 is that Claudius has just deduced that Hamlet may not just be lovesick for Ophelia like Polonius had previously thought, but truly insane. Then, out of fear and a desire to protect himself, he decides to send Hamlet overseas to England.
That's right, Cecilia. And during this discovery, Claudius also reveals some of his true colors and intent when he displays his desire for Hamlet to be dead.
Yes, and by the way, Alex, I'm not sure if you caught this the first time you read the text, but did you notice that this is actually an example of dramatic irony within the play, where the audience knows something which a character of the play doesn't? In this situation, the audience is aware of Claudius's desire for Hamlet to be dead without Hamlet knowing.
Oh, you're right, Cece. Good point. One last thing to mention on the topic of setting background is that Norway is currently on its way to siege a small part of Poland and needs to pass through Denmark in order to do so.
That is right. Now let's get into the actual text, where we start off with the Prince of Norway, Fortinbras, giving commands to his captain.
Go, captain, from me greet the Danish king. Tell him that by his license Fortinbras craves the conveyance of a promised march over his kingdom. You know the rendezvous. If that his majesty would aught with us, we shall express our duty in his eye, and let him know so.
The captain answers with, I will do it, my lord.
And Fortinbras responds with, Go softly on.
At this point in the scene, Fortinbras has commanded his captain to march to the Danish king. The captain agrees, and all but the captain exit to display his march.
During his march, the captain runs into Hamlet, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, and others where they exchange dialogue, and Hamlet questions the captain about his business and what he's doing in Denmark.
In the following dialogue, Alex will be reading as Hamlet, and I will be reading as the captain.
Good sir, whose powers are these?
They are of Norway, sir.
How purposed, sir, I pray you?
Against some part of Poland.
Who commands them, sir?
The nephew to old Norway, Fortinbras.
Goes it against the main of Poland, sir, or for some frontier?
Truly to speak, and with no addition, we go to gain a little patch of ground, that hath in it no profit but the name. To pay 5 ducats, 5, I would not farm it, nor will it yield to Norway or the Pole a rinker rate should it be sold in fee.
Why then the Polak never will defend it.
Yes, it is already garrisoned.
So, to briefly summarize this exchange and put it into more familiar words, we see Hamlet asking a bunch of questions to the captain, including whose army he sees, where that army is headed, what the purpose of the advancement is, and why the Norwegians want such an interesting piece of land, all of which the captain responds promptly and quickly to.
Looking deeper into this dialogue, a few things we learn are that Fortinbras, like Hamlet, isn't really identified as a prince or as himself, but rather is identified with his dead father, the old king.
That's right, Cece. And that's not actually the only similarity we see between Fortinbras and Hamlet. In fact, it could be said that Fortinbras is like the Norwegian equivalent of Hamlet, a prince whose father died and is set on avenging his death.
Good connection, Alex. However, one key difference between these two characters is that Fortinbras is very decisive, and at times even impulsive about his decision making. This is drastically different from Hamlet's ambiguous personality that makes Hamlet question and doubt his decisions often, which will lead to an important soliloquy following this dialogue, but we'll get into that in a later episode.
An interesting point about this dialogue is the fact that the land Norway is trying to obtain serves no real value to either the Polish or the Norwegians, according to the captain.
Why would the Norwegians want the land if it serves no real value to them?
Well, it is stated to be simply a name to hold for either side. If I were to put this into pop culture terminology, I might say that Norway just wants the land to be in their possession so they can say that it's theirs and for the clout that owning more land brings to a nation, specifically during this time period.
So, Alex, now that we've read the whole passage and put it into an easy to understand format, what do you think the importance of this passage is?
Well, Cecilia, my first time reading this over, I felt like we wouldn't have much to talk about and analyze. It seems on the surface like not much goes on during this simple dialogue. However, reading between the lines and understanding the context of the story and what this causes Hamlet to do shows us its purpose.
You're completely right, Alex. I felt the same way when I first read this, and it wasn't until after reading the lines from the following scene that I understood the importance of Hamlet's discussion with Fortinbras' captain. The whole dialogue between the two is really just the setup for one of Hamlet's important soliloquies of conversion.
That's exactly what I picked up on, Cecilia. Hamlet, upon hearing of everything Fortinbras is doing to avenge his father, has realized how little he has done, and might even be feeling guilty about how slow he is deciding how and if he is going to kill Claudius.
And that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Hamlet Weekly, where we analyze the first 25 lines of Act 4, Scene 4 of William Shakespeare's Hamlet.
If you are able to, please consider clicking the link attached to the podcast to give us feedback or donate to our Patreon so that we can keep this podcast going. We really appreciate feedback from our audience so that we can improve our content. Next week, we will be discussing beyond lines 1 to 25 of Scene 4, Act 4, where we see the next important soliloquy from Hamlet that we mentioned before, where he reflects on Fortinbras' decisiveness and undergoes a change in mindset.
See you next Sunday.